Call the meeting to order. Call the roll.
Trustee Healy?
Here.
Trustee Katsinas?
Here.
Trustee Milani?
Here.
Trustee Compass?
Here.
Trustee Reardon?
Here.
Trustee Radiszewski?
Here.
Mayor Pika?
Here.
Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Approval of the August 21st, 2023 regular meeting minutes.
Mr. Mayor,
Trustee Katsinas.
I move to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole of August 21st, 2023.
Second.
Any comments or changes? Call the roll.
Trustee Katsinas?
Aye.
Trustee Radiszewski?
Aye.
Trustee Healy?
Aye.
Trustee Milani?
Aye.
Trustee Compass?
Aye.
Trustee Reardon?
Aye.
Mayor Pika?
Aye.
Consideration and action on a resolution expressing official intent regarding certain capital expenditures to be reimbursed from proceeds of one or more obligations to be issued by the village.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Compass.
Move to recommend to the Village Board to approve a resolution expressing official intent regarding certain capital expenditures to be reimbursed from proceeds of one or more obligations to be issued by the Village of Orland Park, Cook, and Will Counties, Illinois.
Second.
Any questions or comments? This is just procedural to pay for the capital expenditures as we've approved in the capital plan. Call the roll.
Trustee Compass?
Aye.
Trustee Milani?
Aye.
Trustee Healy?
Aye.
Trustee Katsinas?
Aye.
Trustee Reardon?
Aye.
Trustee Radiszewski?
Aye.
Mayor Pika?
Aye.
FLC Facility Improvements 23-053 ITB.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Radiszewski.
I move to recommend to the Village Board to approve awarding ITB 23-053 FLC Facility Improvements to Kraus Construction Incorporated for a total amount not to exceed $591,218.25 or $563,065 plus a 5% contingency of $28,153.25.
Second.
Any questions or comments? So this is just for the FLC improvements. I noticed it's over budget, but we did have, 5 bidders, and it's the low bidder, correct? Okay, so clearly we budgeted a little wrong. I know that was, someone asked me that question, and I said I think this is maybe the first or second time I've seen it where we've been over budget. It doesn't happen very often, so I think overall you guys do a really good job. This just wanted to surprise us a little bit. Okay, call the roll.
Trustee Radiszewski?
Aye.
Trustee Healy?
Aye.
Trustee Katsinas?
Aye.
Trustee Milani?
Aye.
Trustee Compass?
Aye.
Trustee Reardon?
Aye.
Mayor Pika?
Aye.
Orland Park Business Center, Lot 4, 11601, 183rd Place, Warehouse and Office Building.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Milani.
move to recommend to the Village Board to approve the Plan Commission recommended action as presented in the staff report regarding case number 2023-0380, also known as Orland Park Business Center, Lot 4.
Second.
Anything to add there, Steve?
Yeah, so the staff presented the report. It was a unanimous decision to accept the staff recommendation, which was to approve an industrial development and 4 of the 5 variances that they had requested. The petitioner would like to contest the recommendation of the Plan Commission, which is why we're here at the Committee of the Whole, and that has got to do with the placement of sidewalks. The only thing I want to emphasize is that in 2020, we did pass a complete streets policy, which says that we're supposed to integrate all modes and forms. Our ordinance says you have to have sidewalks on both sides of the street. This is one of the judgment factors when we are applying for grants for transportation. So I'll let you have the report. I don't need to go into any details. We have some visuals if you want to see those. One of which, interestingly, is a picture from Google when they were taking videoing the street, and there's a guy walking along the curb, not on a sidewalk. which is it's coincidental for this.
And Steve, the petitioner is here, right?
I believe so.
Okay, so, the Planning Commission passed this with 4 of the requests, so 1, 2, 4, and 5, and it was number 3 that they did not pass, correct?
From the original one. I'm sorry, I don't have the original in front of me. The one that was not, they did not pass was the request to not put the sidewalks in.
So there was a waive the requirement
there we
sidewalks
go,
should be
yeah.
required on both sides of all local streets in the village.
Yes.
That was the variance that was not. Okay,
Correct. Yeah, I see
and
that.
just for clarification, Dennis, we need a supermajority, correct, to overrule that? Okay, great. If the petitioner would like to speak.
Nicole, can you put the first slide up? There we go.
I need to get something out of my,
How you doing?
Good, how you doing? Hello, everybody. I'm John Atkinson with the petitioner, Orland Investors. And what had happened was, was conveyed, we were unanimously approved. The one point that did come up was the issue of the sidewalks. And it went to a the Plan Commission vote without our input. So we worked with staff and they said, we can come to the committee of the whole and explain where you're coming from and allow the committee of the whole to, hear us out and then, whatever you decide, you decide. So,
Okay.
with that said, okay. So, and I've got Kevin Chaffin here. Kevin actually had a hand in the overall development planning of the business park back in 2001. Okay. And what Kevin has here in his, on this little board here, okay, this is when the board, the village board approved the plans, okay, you can see we think it was well thought that we've got lighter uses here, and you see sidewalks on the north side of 183rd place, right, and around the lighter use of the offices, okay? So, but what you don't see is any sidewalks on the remaining 20 or 21 lots, okay? So what we're saying is that we don't, in our eyes, consider this a new development, and the development was the development of a 60-acre parcel here, and we're really the last, our affiliate now is the last, there's only two lots left to be developed. Ours here, which is just south of 183rd place in another lot over here, okay? So, and then when you look, you can see the same thing that's conveyed here, on the Google map, and I got a laser pointer if you want me to point out where those.
I think we can see it on the map.
You can see it on the map, fine. Okay, all right. So, and what was, again, it went to a vote before we got a chance to kind of raise our hand to say our piece on it. So what we're thinking really is, again, with this lot, okay, again, we think the overall development is already approved by the village and well thought as to where sidewalks would be placed, okay? And then in industrial parks, we've developed a fair number of them in the southwest suburbs as well as other parts of greater Chicago area. And consistently, we've only put sidewalks on one side of the street because, there's a fair amount of truck traffic and we don't want to kind of restrict, so people aren't all over the place in terms of use of the sidewalk. And then I guess, a concern that actually was brought up by a member of the Plan Commission is, okay, let's picture if somebody puts if we have to put a sidewalk in here along the south side of 183rd Place or the west side, this is just our lot right here. It's, in essence, and I paraphrase it exactly what they said, it's a sidewalk to nowhere. Okay, so, you know, and I'm a village resident, I'm a proponent of sidewalks myself, but if someone's walking or riding a bike, they're gonna land on grass. So what does that really accomplish in terms of, as is pointed out, a safe and effective manner? If you put a sidewalk to nowhere, I think that's actually contrary to safe and effective manner. So I think that's a little bit that I had to say. Kevin, you have anything to add?
Just, I think what John's trying to point out is like at the corner, this sidewalk wouldn't even connect to the street. So this sidewalk wouldn't connect to anything on the south side. At the corner, you wouldn't run it to the street because it's not accessible. There's nowhere anybody could go from there. So, and even if the property to the west was developed, I would see with those with two sides of sidewalk, but then they would cross at that property line over to the north side where there is a sidewalk that goes all the way out, which at some point, I guess, could go all the way to Wolf Road. So the anticipation was Lot 1 and Lot 2 have sidewalks that could be furthered in either direction.
And Kevin, if I'm correct, like today, if anybody wanted to get to Wolf Road, they can, all the way from our west property.
I don't believe the east side developed, but from the subdivision you could get to the
Correct.
subdivision.
Yes, yeah, because we did not.
Right.
But then I do know, let's say along 183rd Street, which is, right, that goes all the way to Wolf.
Yeah, it looks like it does.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. And then we took it when the park was developed, to your point, to where that darker pavement is, that's where the boundaries of the Orland Park Business Center is. And that's kind of what that is.
So Steve, what is staff's position on this?
Staff has, our position is that eventually 183rd Place will extend. It is likely that would happen. The way that we've been discussing that would extend is it would carry significantly more traffic, that there'd be a different traffic pattern on 183rd Place than 183rd, which is Orland Parkway. Can you go to the last slide? You know, people, the one with the person walking on the street. You know, even though there's a sidewalk available, this is the development. This person is clearly not walking on that side, and we'd much rather have them on a sidewalk. And then the question comes, if not now, when? So if they don't put it in, and we do have to do it, whose responsibility is to put the sidewalk in, and it would probably fall into us to do. So, I mean, we feel that like we have with everyone, and as any of these other parcels that are currently developed come in for any other kind of appearance review, like we've been doing with everybody, we've been completing sidewalk segments. We've been doing it around the mall, we've been doing it in a bunch of places. So that's just what our policy is that we complete the sidewalk sections as developments come before.
And we're talking about just the sidewalk on 183rd Place, is that correct?
The one, they're actually, well, your request is to not put it in 116th?
So
On 116th or 183rd Place.
can you go back to the first slide? So when this was originally approved, Steve, it looks like there's no sidewalk at all on anything south of 183rd Place.
That's probably the case. Since 2020, when we adopted the complete streets policy, now we're in a different direction, so.
Right. But, I mean, it kind of, I'm playing devil's advocate here, though, but it kind of falls into the, the Laguna Woods, Orland Hills subdivision, the original Orland Hills subdivision, not West Haven, that don't have sidewalks and they have ditches, correct? So it kind of falls under that same category, and we're redeveloping them and we're still putting ditches. We're not putting sidewalks.
Okay.
I mean, is that not true?
Is that true? Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with it.
So it's a conundrum, given that, essentially what you're going to have is you're going to have an L-shaped sidewalk here that connects to nothing, anywhere.
For the
I'm happy to
time
hear the
being.
rest of the board's opinion. Thoughts?
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Healy?
speaking for myself, we want to be pro-business here, and wasting money, to me, on a sidewalk to nowhere is not pro-business. This is just talking about these individual lots. There's nothing, like I say, it's a sidewalk to nowhere. I'd also like to point out that during a third of the year, during the winter months, when there's ice and snow, I guess we would expect those sidewalks to nowhere to be maintained, even though nobody walks on them. And that's just more cost to the tenant and all that.
We also become responsible for those, right, Joel? For maintenance of those, yeah. So we become responsible for something in nowhere. Now, let me, again, play the what-if game. If something's developed to the west, presumably it could be housing, but would we not put a crosswalk across the street prior to the industrial so that it met the sidewalk? I mean, if there was no sidewalk there, would we not do that?
Presumably at an intersection, we would do that. So the next, depends where the intersections are, but the next intersection would be right at this property. So if we were to put a
Presumably, we
crosswalk
would
in,
do
we'd
that.
put it in at the
So right
corner.
now, we would have we would basically have an L-shaped sidewalk to nowhere that we also have to fix and maintain and evaluate and all those things in the future. And this was built 20 years ago, so, when are people, and again, we're getting back to, okay, we want people to do appearance reviews, and we're gonna request some things, like I'm looking at the parking lots, and I'm guessing we'll request islands, correct? In those parking lots?
If they're changing the parking lot, we would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then we would ask them for sidewalks too, so we're gonna ask them for all these additional things. What's more important to us? Is it more important to us to have another 100 feet of sidewalk, or is it more important to beautify the landscaping? So, again,
And we are, in terms of beautifying the landscape, in exchange for the variance being offered, we offered and the village accepted, we'll put 2 park benches in so people can overlook the pond there too.
okay. So what's the landscape plan look like?
Can you jump forward 1 or 2 more? Keep going, that.
Okay, so it's very well landscaped.
Yes. We exceed the requirements.
Well, I don't know how anyone's going to vote on this, not like, but I would entertain a motion. To grant the variance, and to grant the variance for item number 3, which is to not require sidewalks.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Then we can discuss. Discuss that if anybody has any questions or comments. Any other questions or comments? Okay,
Mr. Mayor,
Trustee Katsina.
just to be clear, in that first slide that you showed, there's no sidewalks in that whole section that's south of 183rd, or, yeah.
On the south side of 183rd
Correct.
place, you are correct.
So no other building in there that has been built.
No.
Okay.
No, and if you look closely at the aerial, you can see that.
So this, in effect, would be a sidewalk that doesn't connect with anything.
I'm paraphrasing,
Yeah.
but Trustee Healy
and-
said it appropriately, sidewalk to
And
nowhere.
what would be the probability that we'd ever have buildings?
Any other comments from the trustees? Okay, and I don't vote on this, right?
Correct. You need 4 trustees to.
Right, okay. So I'll call the roll on the amendment to override the planning commission and grant the variance for the sidewalks. And again, the mayor doesn't vote on overriding the planning commission. Call the roll.
Trustee Malani?
Aye.
Trustee Healy?
Aye.
Trustee Katsinas?
Aye.
Trustee Compass?
Aye.
Trustee Reardon?
Aye.
Trustee Rashewski?
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. Call the roll on the,
Thank you very much. It's
You're welcome.
good business sense. And
you're welcome. Call the roll on the original motion.
Trustee Malani?
Aye.
Trustee Compass?
Aye.
Trustee Healy?
Aye.
Trustee Katsinas?
Aye.
Trustee Reardon?
Aye.
Trustee Rashewski?
Aye.
Mayor Peacock?
Aye. Motion carries as amended.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Debt Service Program, update on debt program and 2023 GO bonds for capital.
Mayor and Village Board, I'd like to introduce Bob Lewis of PMA Securities. Bob is the village's financial advisor. And Bob's just going to go through a little bit of an overview of our debt program in anticipation of debt sale that's planned to occur in the next coming weeks.
Well, thank you everyone for having me here tonight. So I'll begin by giving you a brief update of the municipal bond market, and then we'll look into the financing plans, which is really just an update of plans that were implemented a few years ago as we lead up to this next bond sale. So go ahead and advance one more page. So this graph you've seen before, but just to review the contents of it, the gray area represents the federal funds rate over the last 20 years. The lines represent 4 different rates in an index called the Municipal Market Data Index, which is a market basket of AAA rated bonds. And we use it in our industry to monitor trends taking place in the municipal bond market, just like you use the Dow Jones Industrials to monitor trends in the stock market. So graphed here are the 1-year rate, the 5-year rate, the 10, and the 20. And from historical perspective, the red line represents the average of the 10-year rate over this 20 years worth of data, and it's a 2.57%. For much of this year, we've been moving up and down around that average. Fortunately, recently here in September, and now going into October, we have seen interest rates rise, not just in the municipal bond market, but they've risen across the board in treasury market, corporate market, mortgage market. All markets have seen interest rates increase, so we're now above that 20-year average of the 10-year rate. If we can go ahead and advance to the next slide, this is the same 2 data sets that we showed you in the prior slide, but we begin at 2020, so you can see better what's been happening here in recent history. The far left-hand side, where you see the lines shoot up pretty quickly, that was at the onset of the pandemic when financial markets became unstable worldwide across the board, and municipal rates went up very quickly. Things stabilized as the year went on, and all-time lows in these indices were reached at those, as indicated by those 2 ovals. You sold the 21 A and B bonds around the time of those all-time low rates. It was a time when you had pivoted from doing short-term borrowings, lines of credit that were later on taken out with long-term fixed-rate bonds. We took out all of your lines of credit you had at that time, plus provided funding for financing in calendar year 21. And it, at a time that was very fortuitous for the village, so it was a good change and shift in your practice of doing short-term borrowings and switching to long-term borrowings. You sold your next major series of bonds for capital projects there, where it indicates Series 22 bonds. And with rates increasing, you accelerated some other projects and pivoted to sell another long-term series of bonds in the middle of 22. Now you notice that rates had come up quite a bit from when you first sold bonds at the beginning of 2022. Fortunately, it was a time when the bank placement market was very good, where we went directly, pivoted from what was a planned public offering where an underwriter would buy your bonds and resell them, and pivoted to a bank placement rather quickly, and Capital One stepped up and beat the public market by almost 70 basis points. Now they bought so it wasn't like the bank placements that you had done that were 5 years or less. This was a 25-year financing that Capital One had stepped up and purchased. Since that time, banks have really shifted their perspective. They're much higher in interest rate than the public market is today. In case you're wondering, like, hey, why not Capital One again? Well, you wouldn't do as well with Capital One on this financing as you did then. But it was good that the board had authorized parameters that allowed us to pivot and take advantage of those relative market conditions. So on the far right side of the chart, you can see the increase that we've had here in the last month in interest rates. So let's go ahead and, any questions on the market? Otherwise, we'll pivot into the plan of finance.
So, question for you, and I know you're not Nostradamus, but what's your sense of where the market's headed?
Wow, I mean, the commentary I've read over the last few weeks, you have people like Jamie Dimon, who, says people shouldn't be surprised if rates go to 6 or 7%, speaking of the 10-year treasury. And then I read something else over the weekend, I can't remember, it was a Wall Street firm talking about, the market's poised for gains in the muni bond market, or in bonds overall, which means lower yields. So you have these divergent perspectives from very well-respected people in the marketplace. I think it's going to be very interesting what happens here over the next 3 months. You have the big things that could, because what we ultimately need to see is how high are these rate increases that the Fed done before it breaks something in the economy. And when it breaks something in the economy, they'll pivot and they'll start lowering interest rates. Right now, there's a shift in perspective is Fed's going to maintain interest rates for a longer period of time. That's why we've seen interest rates come up across the board in September. I think what's going to be interesting in the next 3 months is the impact of the UAW strike and the student loans repayment restarting. I read an article over the weekend, I think the median payment, was about $500 per month that millions of people are going to have to start paying again. Imagine having to take $500 and when you're young, we're all young, right? But when we were very young, and all of a sudden you got to take $500 out of your budget and start paying towards a student loan, consumption is going to fall. And what is the impact going to be? And if that has the impact that I think it could, interest rates could go down, but right now, you have these series of plans laid out and you need the funding for the projects you need to do. And, somebody like Jamie Dimon could be right, and it could be worse 3 months from now. So I think it's more prudent to proceed with the plan as kind of like dollar cost averaging with, our pension funds, our 401k funds. You put the money in, you invest it, and over time, you do really well by following that methodology. I think that kind of applies here. You're hoping that by the time you sell again in 24, that rates have started to come back down, but, it could be where if you waited, you wished you had sold it now. Okay, so this plan of finance, the 23 bonds, the purpose of the bonds is to finance various capital projects throughout the village. I know you're probably familiar with these projects, facilities, road, water main improvements. And I know you're familiar with the second bullet point too, but just to recap for everyone else, the village implemented a new utility tax and increased the home rule sales tax to provide additional funding to support capital improvements. Up to $3.7 million, I should have annually in there, is dedicated to this purpose. And you'll see what that means graphically on the next slide as we look at your plans to support additional debt service paid from your general government funds. The hope is, and this has probably already been explained to you as well, is this is going to give you a boost to support more debt service to fund these capital projects. And then eventually the debt service payments will start to taper off, and then these additional funds can shift over to pay-as-you-go capital, much like you have planned in the water, sewer, and stormwater system. So the next slide is a graphical representation. The red line represents your current allocation of general government fund revenues, a mixture of property taxes and some general funds, perhaps home rule sales tax from some years to the other, but it's about $4 million per year. The dark blue lines are your current payments that are paid from within this revenue source. The light blue are the 23 bonds that we're talking about approving later this month. The orange represents planned financings in 24 through 27. And so those payments start to ramp up to be paid from these additional revenues to come from the utility tax and home rule sales tax. And that is represented by the dash line, getting to that maximum allocated funds for this purpose. And you can see towards the later years, the orange bars start going down. So that would be when you can start shifting to more pay-as-you-go projects for these newly dedicated revenues. And this excludes your Main Street TIF and as well as your enterprise system supported debt. And we're going to talk about those also in the presentation. So up here, we flip-flop pages 8 and 9. If you're looking at the presentation that was already sent to you, you'll need to advance to 9, then come back to 8. So the water, sewer, and stormwater-related debt, or your enterprise fund-related debt, includes borrowings through 2026. And those borrowings were set forth in the water, or the rate impact study that you approved last year, which also included expected rate increases that you've adopted and codified. Also included in this plan is the debt service of the Oakland Regional System. So we've planned for what they've already planned for, and we've assumed that their debt service at their peak continues at the peak. We don't know that, but we want to be conservative, assuming that debt service would continue on. I'll point that out when we get to the graph. That debt service, the projected debt service from that system does fluctuate whenever Kevin gets an update. We anticipate at least the shared portion of that debt service should improve because Olympia Fields, Madison, and Country Club Hills has been added to the system, so they'll share some of that fixed cost burden of building this system to bring out Lake Michigan water. So as market fluctuations occur and as your borrowing plans change over the next 4 or 5 years, when it's time to analyze the system again, it may be that the village has to adopt additional rate increases at that time, but for now, the rate increases that you have adopted and codified should be able to meet this plan. And that's what you see on the graphical representation in the next slide. The dark gray or black lines represent the current projection from the Oakland Regional System. The light gray represents just maintaining that payment at its peak in case it's needed. If it's not needed, well, then the overall debt service would come down at that time, and you'd have more available for pay-as-you-go. The dark blue represents the portion of the 23 financing payable from the enterprise funds. The light blue, I'm sorry, that's the light blue. The dark blue is your current payments paid from the enterprise system funds. And the green represents the debt service for the 24 and 26 financings that are to be issued by the village as part of the plans of finance. And the orange is the pay-as-you-go annual payments, which is basically what's left over after you operate the enterprise system, pay your debt service. Orange is whatever's left over, and that can all be dedicated to pay-as-you-go capital. So that's going to fluctuate every year depending upon the performance of the system that year, which is going to vary depending upon demand of the system.
But, yeah, and Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're building in theory here, we should be building some capital funds for future water projects in our water system.
Correct, and yes, and this was all contemplated in the rate study, all the projects that are in the 5-year plan.
So all of this that we have as pay-as-you-go capital will fund future projects, but also anything left over will be there for contingency in the future or to pay down debt or whatever we decide to do.
Correct.
Okay.
The future borrowings that we're going to have are going to be at a higher interest rate than we've had the last year and a half.
Yes.
When we all bought our first, our people as young as I, when we bought our first houses between 8.75% and 20% mortgages, we refinanced them on that when mortgage interest rates eventually dropped. Can we do the same thing here? Are these bonds callable or are they?
Yes, they will be callable. Generally, the call date is 9 to 10 years into the payback period. So unlike our mortgages, we can pay down any time. In the bond market, the investors are accustomed to having a certain amount of time in which their bonds won't be called back in order for them to buy in and accept your bonds.
Okay, so we're locked into it for basically 10 years and see where
Yes.
things are at that time.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
And then these future financings that we incorporated into these plans, we've ran them at these higher current market rates plus a cushion. We added I think 0.5%. So hopefully when it comes time to sell bonds in 24, 25, and 26, we'll start to see them come down, which is all dependent upon the prospects for inflation, because all this is driven by what inflation is expected to do over the next several years.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, George and Kevin, so in 2022, obviously, we borrowed ahead of time because we saw this coming, and we did, even though it was a little bit higher, it's still a lot less than what the current rates are.
Yes.
And I think currently, we're in a good position to minimize the borrowing we have right now, to wait to see what we need in the future, because we're waiting to see what happens with the bond market, correct?
Yeah, with this bond issuance, there is just with what we did with the last one, the parameters ordinance gives some flexibility on when the bond sale could occur. Is that right, Bob?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so we're, provide some context. This borrowing is about $11 million, $4 million, that's for wastewater, or water, wastewater, and stormwater. The other $7 million is for the other projects within the village. That $11 million, which sounds like a very big number to us, is relatively small compared to the first three financings that were recapped earlier. So when you look at your whole debt portfolio, while this is going to be at the higher end of the range, you've borrowed a significant amount of your debt at very low historic interest rates. I mean, the highest one you had was that one that was bought by Capital One, and that still had I want to say something around a 3.7% or so. Does that ring a bell? I don't know. We'll go by my memory, but it's right around 3.7%. This one's going to be probably 4.5%, maybe 4.75%, depending on the day that you sell the bonds. Some of those earlier bonds, the ones that we sold in early 21, 22, those had 2% something handles on them. So I mean, you really have locked in your prior debt at very low rates, and this one being a smaller financing, the other ones means that your cost of funding over the last 3 years is still going to be rather low compared to where it's been historically, in spite of this one having a higher interest rate than you had in the first three.
And Bob, and to answer Trustee Healy's question about callable bonds, we've taken advantage of previous bond issuance, called them and refinanced them, right?
Yeah, when we did the financings that over the last 3 years that were for new money projects, those oftentimes were done with refinancings of outstanding bonds, which lowered your cost of funding at that time. Okay, so the next slide is a summary of the timeline. You're hearing the presentation tonight. You'll have before you for consideration October 16th an ordinance, similar to the ordinances that you've passed the last couple of years, that which will authorize the sale of the bonds up to a not to exceed amount, maximum term, and then delegates the authority to the mayor and the administration to sign off on the sale. The plan is to sell it that week, but we're going to monitor market conditions. We're not going to just sell it that week because you've approved the sale. I mean, not that we have a crystal ball to predict when it might be better, but we don't want to sell in a market where it's extremely choppy and difficult to sell the bonds. So this ordinance gives us the flexibility to at least sell into a stable market. If we follow that timeline and things are stable that week, then you would receive the proceeds around November 7th. Okay, and the last slide you have in the presentation, because we just wanted to recap your three major areas that you have financing currently. You have the general government funds, you have the enterprise funds, and then on a smaller level, you have the Main Street TIF supported debt. The red line represents the annual debt service that's paid from the Main Street TIF revenues, also revenues from the ground lease that you have in place at that same area. That's represented by the red line. And in most years, you're at or below that red line. The gray area represents some bullet payments that were put into place at the end of the TIF. If there's contingency plans in place for that, the hope is that maybe that TIF could be, the revenues from the TIF could somehow be used to pay that, where there's some surplus, or we can refinance some of that out into those later years where there's some room within the ground lease. Worst case, those gray payments would have to be paid from within the general government fund revenues. But if you bounce back to page 7, you'll see those gray payments there in 27 and 28. So we're factoring them into there just in case this payment stream has to make those payments because there's nothing else available for it. If things work out better and you're able to pay all or portion from some other revenue related to the Main Street TIF or the ground lease, then those gray payments in this graph can become become actually orange for other debt service, or it can become orange for pay-as-you-go capital at that time. So that's the sum of my presentation. Any other questions?
Any other questions or comments? Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And, reminder to the public, if they're watching, I know not a lot of people watch, but this board, myself in 2017 and 3 of you in 2019 and 3 of you in 2021, we were left a bag of crap, to put it mildly, in that there were $31 million in the hole in the TIF, $39 million of property tax rebates that we borrowed to give you on your own credit card, and that's 18 million of interest. All told, that's $88 million. Pretty much funds are almost in our entire capital plan if we didn't have that. So unfortunately, we can't control those decisions. We have to just deal with what was left behind, and what was left behind were roads in bad condition, parks in bad condition, all that. So we've done a good job of restructuring that and putting us in a position where we can take care of it and not leave the next boards 15, 20 years from now in the same spot. So good work by the board. Go ahead.
Lateral appointment police supervisors ordinance.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Compass.
I move to adopt an ordinance entitled, an ordinance amending Title II, Boards and Commissions, Chapter 4, Board of Fire and Police Commissioners, and Title 8, Police, Chapter 1, Police Department of the Orland Park Village Code regarding the lateral appointment of police officers and the assignment of police officers to the special assignments of Lieutenant and Commander in the Police Department of the Village of Orland Park.
Second. George, care to elaborate on this one?
So in order to continue to maintain a safe community, it's essential that the village has a broad and well-qualified pool of candidates to serve throughout the police department. The proposed ordinance would amend Title II and Title VIII of the village code to allow for lateral appointments of police supervisors. This is all part of the village's process of merit hiring and making sure that we can continue to hire the best for our entire organization.
I mean, this is a no-brainer. The reason why we have a great organization throughout the village is that we hire the best available people, internal and external. So I think that's, and we choose whoever's best. So I think this is a no-brainer. Call the roll.
Trustee Compass.
Aye.
Trustee Reardon.
Aye.
Trustee Healy.
Aye.
Trustee Katsinas.
Aye.
Trustee Malani.
Aye.
Trustee Radiszewski.
Aye.
Mayor Pika.
Aye.
Are there any non-scheduled citizens or visitors here to speak?
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll.
Trustee Compass.
Aye.
Trustee Malani.
Aye.
Trustee Healy.
Aye.
Trustee Katsinas.
Aye.
Trustee Reardon.
Aye.
Trustee Radiszewski.
Aye.
Mayor Pika.
Aye. See you guys in about 15 minutes.